Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having this task force on Puerto Rico status. Pedro Marin, I'm born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and for the last 15 years I reside in the state of Georgia. I became the first Latino elected official in the state of Georgia, becoming a state representative, which I hold that office as we speak. I'm more into access to credit. I'm the vice president for the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislature. And last year, in 2009, Congressman Joe Baca dropped a piece of legislation, H.R. 3171, Bridging Bank to Recovery Act, Bridging Bank Access to Recovery Act of 2009. He asked me if I could do and sponsor resolutions for the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislature, which we did, and we adopted that. Bridging Bank, and I want you guys to take a look at that because I have talked to leadership in Puerto Rico, and this Bridging Bank will also entitled to be placed in Puerto Rico. And what Bridging Banks do is allow for a new financial institution to cater to the unbanked and underbanked. As everybody knows, with the economy as we are right now, over 100 million people in the United States and Puerto Rico don't have access to credit. If you don't have that 620, 640 FICO score, you're in trouble. You can't access anything. With this Bridging Bank, we'll do financial literacy, financial education, and a graduation program for people. Then, once they have a good credit score, then they can access any other products out there. I was former state director for LULAC, and we adopted a similar resolution last year in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in the National Convention. And Leo and Raza and some other, I have spoke with them, and they're in favor of some type of legislation that will help the underbanked and unbanked. And why I'm bringing this up, because we have talked, and the piece of legislation allows Puerto Rico to be part of that Bridging Bank of Recovery Act of 2009. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I am a member of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of New York, and my views here are my own, but I was formerly Secretary of Commerce for Puerto Rico, also Executive Director of the Economic Development Agency, and Executive Director of the Federal Affairs Administration here in Washington, D.C. Although I agree with my colleague from on the other side of the aisle, those who know me know I'm rabidly pro-statehood, I think it's very important that you listen carefully between the lines, because some of the proposals that have been made for the development of the economy in Puerto Rico make certain legal assumptions that are incorrect. And they're legal assumptions that have a direct effect and have had a direct historical effect in Puerto Rico through foreign-based tax subsidies in the island, whether it be Section 901, Section 936, or any of its variants. Puerto Rico and its economy was essentially a manufacturing economy for the better part of the 20th century, certainly from 1948 through 1980, and some people argue through 1990. What has happened in Puerto Rico is that over 40% of its GDP, which is generated by manufacturing, and increasingly and exclusively only by high-end manufacturing, such as pharmaceutical transfer pricing in Puerto Rico and the holding of royalties in Puerto Rico, has slowly but surely left the island. We've seen manufacturing go down in pharma from 34,000 in the year 2000 to 19,000 today in 2010. And we've seen the general manufacturing sector going from 154,000 jobs in 2000 to about 89,000 today. But I think it's a little bit naive, and it's very important that this committee come across in a way with a clear understanding that certain proposals are directly tied to the status of Puerto Rico. You cannot pretend that you can have a federal tax subsidy under the foreign section of the Internal Revenue Code and think that that is not tied to status, because that particular solution precludes the possibility of statehood, and you're therefore ignoring 53% of the vote of the people in Puerto Rico in the last election. Whether you believe that 53% or not believe in statehood, they voted for a party that specifically advocates statehood. So when you come up with a solution or you think about a solution, be very careful of solutions that could only be applicable to Puerto Rico and its current territorial status. Be very careful of solutions that talk about exemptions, tax subsidies really, for big pharma and high-end manufacturing in Puerto Rico, which only contribute 18,000 jobs out of a 2.2 million person economy in Puerto Rico. The focus really should be on a tax benefit and a number of programs that can be status neutral. Not on a program that calls on Puerto Rico to eliminate the maritime law for Puerto Rico, but make it different from the nation, because in doing so, you're essentially prejudging the status issue, and you will be actively opposed by at least 45%, if not more than 50% of the people on the island. And I'm not trying to denigrate the opposition. They have their own view, but don't be fooled into thinking that it is status neutral. When they argue for a new federal tax-based subsidy in the Foreign Revenue Code, in the IRC section that is foreign of the code, they are arguing for something that is status-based. When they are arguing for some sort of exemption from federal, additional exemption from federal taxation, they're talking about a solution that is possible only if we are not a state. So we need to be practical about the solution. We can't just hide behind conventions of what is great for Puerto Rico, a social compact between the independent nation of Puerto Rico and the U.S. We are a U.S. territory since 1898. And since 1901, through the insular cases, we've been deprived of full constitutional rights, even though we're born U.S. citizens. And the legacy of that, of Plessy versus Ferguson and Bidwell and others, is precisely to be treated separate but equal. Now, I've spoken a little bit about the problem. Let's talk about the solution. There are two solutions that are not going to solve everything. This is a 1-hour agenda here, and frankly, it can't possibly solve the issue of Puerto Rico in 1 hour, although we're very grateful. But I do have two suggestions that I believe are status neutral and therefore sacrifice my view that Puerto Rico should be a state and don't necessarily advocate for statehood, but are possible under a status neutral situation. The first one is a wage-based tax exemption. We had it. It was phased out with Section 936 in late 1995 and sunsetted over a 10-year period in 2005. Why is that wage tax exemption good, important, and status neutral? Because it doesn't just generate money for pharma through transfer pricing and allows pharma to repatriate its revenues, which are now in the $30 billion range. They may be cutting down jobs, but they're making a lot of money in Puerto Rico. What it does is that it tells U.S. companies, you know what, we will give you a tax break, but you will create a job first. You will pay a salary first. And then based on that job and that salary, you are going to get a tax credit. And that's not a novel idea. How novel could it be? You're a U.S. company, and we prefer you creating jobs on U.S. soil than creating them overseas, as the Section 901 companies do in Puerto Rico and do in foreign countries, but do so without creating additional jobs. Why is that a status neutral solution? Because it could be applied not just to Puerto Rico, but for the rest of the nation. And you can limit it, given the budget limitations. I understand it can't just be 100% for the nation, but start somewhere, because it will do good for Puerto Rico. It will generate jobs that are being lost. It will even retain some of the mid-level manufacturing jobs that still have not left the island for China and the Far East, because those mid-level and even the low wage that still exist need to be able to compete with the razor-thin profit margins that they have, for which a revenue-based tax exemption is no good. So that's one solution you can take back to our president and cost it out with Congress and not be in the situation of having to argue according to status or seeming that you're favoring status by favoring Section 936 or favoring elimination of the maritime law as it applies to Puerto Rico or other areas. The second one is empowerment zones. Why is it that we don't have empowerment zones? Empowerment zones precisely allow for the development of entrepreneurship. They are directly related to the creation of jobs, and they don't just allow to apply to Puerto Rico, which is anathema to many people in Congress. I mean, it is very difficult not to have a vote, and it is very difficult of not being fully represented in the U.S., and at the same time not being given the opportunity to improve our economy. So empowerment zones are the second solution, and they apply not just in Puerto Rico, but in the South Bronx, but in the South LA, but in Detroit, in Mississippi, in California, and they are easier to implement. They result in millions of jobs. Now, I know I've spoken extensively. I will submit other comments in writing, but I think it's critical that if you take one thing from this hearing, is that historically, to say that status and economic development policy for Puerto Rico are divorced, it's fanciful, it's untrue, it's incorrect, and it will be unworkable if we don't go and obtain status neutral alternatives. Thank you.